When it comes to AI, nothing's more hotly debated than how much progress is being made toward the development of artificial general intelligence. On the one side, there's people like OpenAI chief Sam Altman, who claimed recently that AGI is essentially a solved problem. On the other is Gary Marcus, who doesn't think we're anywhere close. I'm Jennifer Strong, and this is Shift.
Now here on the steering column is a device called Auto Cruise. You simply set the speed you want.
Self-driving robo-taxis are already on the road in US cities.
As the disk rotates, a mirror reflects the light in the way that depends on how the signal was recorded.
This is the 100 terabyte. I present to you Electro, the Moto Man. Ladies and gentlemen.
I would say that one of my greatest skills is my ability to interact with humans.
This episode, we catch up with cognitive scientist Gary Marcus on his list of predictions for what to watch in AI this year and beyond. The pace of new discoveries in science and tech is simply breathtaking. And on Curiosity Weekly, from Discovery, they make sense of some of the biggest questions and ideas shaping our world. Each week on the show, they unpack breaking science and tech news and dive into fascinating topics like how neuroscientists are studying TikTok and your social media habits to see which chemicals are being released in your brain to make you so obsessed. And did you know that AI can now read hieroglyphs from Egyptian pyramids? Listen to Curiosity Weekly, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Gary Marcus. I'm a cognitive scientist and AI expert, I guess you'd say. I founded an AI company called Geometric AI that I sold to Uber. I've written 6 books about cognitive science and artificial intelligence, and I was one of the first people to say that deep learning might be hitting a wall and that we might reach a plateau.
Okay, so you've got some predictions for AI going into the years ahead here, but before we get to that, let's start with a look back at your last set of predictions, Gary. I mean, do you have that list handy for what you thought we were going to see in 2024?
So I've been making some, let's say, dark predictions about generative AI for quite a while. In fact, before generative AI was a thing, I was pointing out that the ancestors to today's neural networks had problems doing what we call distribution shift nowadays. Some of my earliest academic work as an assistant professor was about this problem. And the problem is these systems can kind of interpolate between examples they've seen before, but they're often really problematic when they extrapolate beyond what they've heard before. I showed this in some simple cases in 1998. The problem has never really gone away. And an awareness of that problem has driven a lot of the predictions that I've made that I think have been really on target. So for example, I had a tweet in March of 24, and I said, by the end of 2024 prediction, we will see 7 to 10 GPT-4 level models, but no massive advance. We won't see GPT-5 or disappointing GPT-5. And remember, when I posted this, we were still seeing lots of posts like, oh, it's going to come out after the Super Bowl. This was back in 2024. You know, people were expecting it like they were hoping for the Easter Bunny or something like that. It never showed up. I predicted that we would see price wars. We'd see very little moat, that nobody would be technically that far ahead of everybody else, that we would kind of see like a pileup, not at GPT-5, but just a little bit better than what OpenAI had already. I said we'd see no robust solution to hallucinations, which are actually something I first anticipated in 2001. I said that we'd see only modest lasting corporate adoption. We might see like people testing it out and stuff like that, but not necessarily rolling out in scale. And I said the profits would be modest and split 7 to 10 ways. I would argue that all of those predictions were right. And how did I make all of those predictions correctly? It's because I understood this basic problem about extrapolation, that if you stick basically to memorized examples, and maybe you can do something that's a little bit like analogy with those examples, but you don't have a deep conceptual understanding of something, you're going to run into problems. And more generally, going back to my 2001 book, The Algebraic Mind, I said that you needed to have much richer representations than these kinds of systems have. And that's proven to be true. In this recent Substack that I wrote with 25 AI predictions from 2025 from Marcus on AI, which is the name of my newsletter, I go through all the ones that we just talked about and a whole bunch more. Most importantly, from this basic understanding, I said in 2022 that deep learning was going to hit a wall. And what I meant by that was not that we would never make any progress at all, but that there were certain problems that were really hard within the paradigm of generative AI that is so popular. So I talked about large language models that we had then. They got better once since then. In the 2 years, there was one significant advance since then. But the problems that I pointed out were hallucinations, trouble with factuality, trouble with what linguists call compositionality. How do you understand a large sentence in terms of its components? And just like stupid boneheaded errors, problems with abstract reasoning. All of those things are still here 2 years later. So every day for the last couple of years, I've heard people talk about exponential progress. But the reality is, since I wrote that 2022 paper called Deep Learning is Hitting a Wall, deep learning has gotten stuck on those particular things. The other thing that I said in that paper was that the idea of scaling that everybody was excited about wasn't going to last forever. So the idea then was we can predict how well a system is going to work by how much data we put into it and how much compute, how many GPUs it has available. And I said at the time, this is not a physical law. It's not like gravity. It doesn't have to hold perpetually throughout the universe. It's holding for a little while, but it's not always going to stay that way. And, people kind of laughed at me, literally laughed at me when I wrote this paper. There was a series of attacks from Sam Altman. Elon Musk took a crack at me in a tweet that mentioned me by name, making fun of this idea that deep learning is hitting a wall. It was a very popular sport to make fun of me about this. But the reality is this is exactly what's happened. In the last couple of months, a bunch of different companies have basically leaked that they're not any longer following these scaling laws, that things are not going as well as expected. They're not getting the gains from adding more data that they thought they were. Most amazing to me, and I actually wrote an essay about this, is Satya Nadella gave a speech in November that almost word for word recreated what I had said in 2022. I doubt he had read the 2022 paper, but he came to the same place, which is that scaling is running out, that it's not a physical law, and that we need new breakthroughs. And that's the most important thing here, is we need new breakthroughs. Large language models probably will exist for a very long time unless somebody makes a more efficient version, but they're only part of what we need. An analogy that I made in my TED Talk a couple of years ago is to Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 distinction. So System 1 is fast, it's automatic, it's reflexive, it's driven by big data. That's kind of what large language models do well. System 2 is more deliberative, systematic, more abstract. Current AI systems don't do that very well. There's actually a tradition of looking at things in that way, but that tradition has been sort of chased off the stage by people like Geoffrey Hinton that are so excited about the large language models and generative AI, deep learning in general. And so if we're actually going to get to what people call artificial general intelligence or just trustworthy AI, I think we're going to need to marry these traditions. We need to take what large language models do well, but also have some breakthroughs in how to connect that with classical artificial intelligence, which looks more like computer programs and databases and things like that. We're going to have to find a way to bring those traditions together. And for sociological reasons, people haven't tried that much. Interestingly, DeepMind's AlphaFold actually is a neurosymbolic system. It's a very tailored neurosymbolic system for one particular thing, understanding the three-dimensional geometry of a protein. But it's a kind of proof of concept that you can do that kind of thing and just won the Nobel Prize. So I think we're seeing signs that we're going to move towards the neurosymbolic AI that really my 2001 book was about. And I've kind of wanted to see this for the last quarter century, if you can believe that. I think we're finally going to move to a more intellectually open part of AI history. I think things have been very narrow. It's almost been like an intellectual monoculture for the last 5 years, where all people really look at is large language models. People doing that, getting massive amounts of money, which makes it hard for anybody else to do anything because recruiting wars and things like that. I think things are going to change.
Okay, so it is a new year, and you do have a new list. This one looks like it has a longer timeline for your predictions. So I don't know if we want to go through all of them because this list is rather long, but what have you got for us? What would you say are the highlights of this list of 25 predictions?
Well, I would say they start with something that Elon Musk said. He said, he said this in April 2024, my guess is that we'll have AI that is smarter than any one human, probably around the end of next year, by which he meant 2025. And a lot of my predictions are kind of going in the opposite direction, saying, look, by the end of 2025, we're not going to be there. So the first is we're not going to see this artificial general intelligence that's smarter than any human by the end of this year. I actually offered him $1 million bet on this. The Wall Street Journal tried to get him to respond, and he didn't. And I think that tells you volumes. He doesn't want to be accountable to making these kind of crazy timelines. So that was one. Another is I recently did find someone who was willing to make a bet. And that bet was based on the bets that I had offered to Elon Musk. And we have 10 tasks that we propose there. And some of them are easy and some of them are hard. Easy for people, I should say. So for example, watch a movie, figure out what's going on, understand when people might laugh or what a plot twist is. That's kind of on the easier side in the sense that almost any human can do it. And some are on the harder side, like write a Pulitzer Prize caliber book. 10, 20, 30 people do that every year. It's not impossible, but it's pretty hard. And so they range from that spectrum. So another of my predictions is that we wouldn't get more than 4 of those to succeed by the end of 2025. And probably we won't get any of them. We won't master any of them in the field of AI. I argued that we're still not going to see much profits this year. That's probably not too surprising. I said that the lack of reliability would continue to haunt generative AI, that hallucinations will still be haunting generative AI by the end of the year. We'll still see reasoning problems, that people are going to get super excited this year about AI agents. They're kind of like Siri on steroids, where you can ask the system to do anything for you. People are going to get really excited about this year, but it's not really going to work that well, except maybe in some very narrow use cases, like ordering from a restaurant, maybe, but even that, probably not. I said that humanoid robotics is going to get huge hype this year. Elon's got his Optimus and so forth, but we're not going to see anything like Rosie the robot, where you have like a household domestic robot that can just take care of everything for you. We're not going to see that this year. We probably won't see that this decade. We might see demos, but it's very easy to build robotics demos. It's very hard to make them in the real world. I won't go through all of them, but that gives you the general sense of the kinds of things. There are also other things like power consumption is going to keep going up and up and up, but I'm guessing the companies aren't going to be transparent about how bad that really is. So there is also a political aspect to some of these predictions.
How did you go about picking the tasks, and how will you decide who wins? You're getting judges, or?
So for that one, for the bet that I made with Brundage, the tasks were all things that came basically from open letters that I wrote to Elon Musk. And I mean, some of them came from my colleague Ernie Davis, who I've collaborated with a long time in discussions with him. One of them is about going into a kitchen and being able to cook dinner, like in an unfamiliar kitchen. That's actually originally from Steve Wozniak. He did it with a cup of coffee. I made it a little bit more general. So some of them have been around for a long time. The comprehension challenge that I told you about is something I proposed in the New Yorker in 2014 after some dumb computer program that nobody even remembers allegedly won the Turing test. And I said, slow down. Winning the Turing test is just about human gullibility. Here would be a better test if a machine could understand a movie and know when to laugh and stuff like that. So some of them have been around for a long time. Some of them I made up for the purposes of articulating Elon's claim that you'd be better than any human. I'm just like, well, what would that actually mean? Let's have some examples here.
If this year's resolution includes saving more and spending less, why are you still paying so much for wireless? Switching to Mint Mobile is an easy way to save money. As the first company to sell premium wireless service online only, Mint Mobile lets you maximize your savings with plans starting at $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan. I made the switch last year, and the savings compared to my big-name carrier have been huge. Plus, beyond the money I'm saving, the service is excellent. It's fast, reliable, and it's the best mobile hotspot I've had, even when I'm uploading big files, like sending the audio for this podcast to my producer. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month unlimited wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/shift. That's mintmobile.com/shift. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/shift. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers only. Speed slower above 40 gigs on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
You've also got a new book, or new enough, right? Last September?
September, that's right.
Called Taming Silicon Valley, How We Can Ensure That AI Works for Us. And, it's made some Books of the Year lists, including, I think, Politico, right?
Mm-hmm.
New Yorker.
Yep.
What led you to write it?
I wrote it in a frenzy. I wrote it in 2 months without ChatGPT's benefit because I was upset with what I was seeing in the U.S. Senate. You might remember, because I think we talked about it before, that I testified at the U.S. Senate in May of 2023. And things look really good there in the sense of everybody in the room, bipartisan, all the senators, and Sam Altman, who was standing next to me, all recognized the need for AI regulation, that we were building this new technology, that we didn't have, perfect control of it, that it was going to cause problems, that we needed AI regulation. And it felt like it was part of history. And I was so excited that like the right thing was going to happen. It seemed amazing. But as the months wore on, by December, when I started writing the book, it became clear that the Senate was not actually going to do anything. The Biden administration made an executive order that was as good as it possibly could be, given the limitation that the executive branch can't actually make law. What we needed next was for the Senate to make some laws, or Senate and the House. And what I could see is it wasn't going to happen. I could see that Chuck Schumer was doing all these listening meetings, and he was not actually bringing anything to the Senate for a vote. And so I wrote the book to kind of raise public awareness about how important it is to get AI policy right and how unlikely it is that the government is going to do this unless citizens actually get active about this and say that it really matters to them. And unfortunately, everything I said, all the dark things I said in the book have basically turned out to be right. And basically the book was a warning about the rise of techno oligarchs and the ineffectiveness in the government to do anything about it. So in that way, unfortunately, the book was very prescient. I would have much preferred that the book now seemed totally out of date and that we'd solved all these problems, but not the case. I mean, in fact, things have gotten worse. In this sense, the book was totally ineffective. I wanted people to think about tech policy in the election because I think the policies we set right now around AI over the next 2 or 3 years are going to have incredible lasting impact in the way that the terrible policies we made around social media, very ineffective, gave the companies basically freedom from liability, have been a disaster. I mean, you think about all the effects of social media on teenage girls and all the polarization in society, which I think is much worse than it was in an earlier era. A lot of that stems from having screwed up the social media policies. When I was at the Senate, all the senators acknowledged that. They said, we screwed up, especially Section 230 that gives freedom to the social media companies to post misinformation, to promote misinformation, has really caused a lot of problems. The senators all realized that it was bad. They realized they took too long on it. That's why they claimed they were going to do better with AI, but they didn't. This also leaves the United States in an awkward position because EU is actually doing something. So EU citizens have much better privacy protections, and they will soon have much better AI protections than American citizens. And so I think other countries are going to be like, what model can we use here? Can we use the European model? Sure. Can we use the American model? There isn't one. So we have missed a chance to have a world leadership position and to influence things by just completely abdicating responsibility and letting Europe kind of lead the way there. There's the so-called Brussels effect, which has happened sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. That's what's going to happen here is, a bunch of European countries are actually going to have some real regulation around AI. The United States is going to have nothing. And that we're probably going to see, for example, this was one of my less confident predictions. We might well see this year a large-scale cyber attack that's in some way caused by generative AI, or I have a piece in Politico explaining the multiple different ways that it can happen. Generative AI can write bad code. It can be used to attack systems, etc. So we may see some serious incidents in the United States. There's very little protection. There's probably going to be very little enforcement in the upcoming administration as it tries to, reduce costs and people get laid off. There's a Supreme Court decision, I guess it's the Chevron case, that is making it harder for agencies to even have any power. And so I feel like U.S. citizens are sitting ducks. We already see AI problems like lots of discrimination when these things are used to make job decisions. There's a much more cybercrime. There are all these kidnapping scams where people fake the voices of their kids. A lot of stuff already happening. It's only going to get worse as these systems not only get more powerful, but get more embedded in society. Like people are starting to use these systems to control weapons, right? OpenAI said, we're not getting involved in the military. And then I think they had trouble making money. And then they said, okay, we made a deal with Endural and we're going to use our stuff in weapons. A lot of scary things might happen. And U.S. citizens have basically no protection or almost no protection.
I mean, Gary, I don't want you to lie to me here, but Is there anything that you're optimistic about for 2025?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that people in the field are starting to realize that they oversold the technology and that we need to do something else. You know the saying, Alcoholics Anonymous, recognition is the first step. It has been really hard coming in some ways from the outside to get the field to recognize that these tools are not magic and that we need other tools to constrain them and work better and so forth. And people have just like jumped on me endlessly. But in the last 2 months, there's been an incredible shift. When you have people like the CEOs of Microsoft and Google sounding kind of like me, represents a real change. And they have the financial power to maybe change the research priorities such that we do better. And I think that will actually happen in 2025, but it will take a while for us to see the results. So from the end user's perspective, I don't think 2025 is going to look so different from 2024. But what goes on in the labs may be a step better than we've seen. And eventually that will start to pay off.
Are there particular things that you're going to be watching, over the next 6 months just to see how they play out?
Sure. I mean, I watch every day. Some new model comes up, some new test of something comes out. And like yesterday, I read this abstract with a very interesting new paper that showed that O1, which is one of OpenAI's recent models, on some very hard math problems does pretty well. And then you change the wording a little bit and it does 30% worse. That's another version of the extrapolation problem I've been harping on for the last quarter century. I'm always looking to see what are the new data. Does anybody have a solution to that problem? Are people still seeing new versions? Apple had a paper on reasoning in October or so that many people read that pointed out another version of the extrapolation problem. So I'm always looking at the scientific literature and I'm always looking at the new releases. So OpenAI released O3, and I wrote a critique or two of that in my Substack. It had a bit of a smoke and mirrors feel to me, but I'm always watching these announcements and trying, to see where we are. It is all a kind of empirical science. There's data. We have to see what actually happens. Particularly with large language models, there are these black boxes that nobody fully understands. Nobody can ever predict what they will do on any specific occasion. It's always a little bit of a crapshoot what comes out of a large language model. And people play around with their prompts and stuff like that. But it's not an exact science. There's some general principles that seem pretty clear at this point, but there's enough room that nobody knows exactly where things are going to go in the next 6 months or next. I made 25 predictions, probably like 20 of them will be right. Or, last year, all told, I probably made about 20 predictions I summarized there, and like 18 of them were right. One was really wrong. I predicted that OpenAI's valuation would not keep coming up because I figured people are going to start to see the flaws in it and whatever. And that was when they were at 86 billion and then they went to like 157 billion. So, the market, as the famous saying goes, can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. So, my predictions about what the systems can do are always going to be better than my predictions about what people do because there's, politics and money and so forth behind those things. They're harder to fathom than what the systems do.
All right. Thank you very much. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Great to talk to you again.
This episode was produced by me and Emma Cillekens and mixed by Garret Lang, with original music from him and Jacob Gorski. Thanks for listening. I'm Jennifer Strong.
From PRX.